Uh, Today, what we'd like to do is to refine the draft strategic plan and the integrated scorecard. I was looking at the website, I couldn't really find the draft, so maybe Aliyah, you can point us to that later. But looking forward to the discussion today. And so let me ask, Aliyah, do we have any public comment?
We do not have any public comment today.
Okay. And so with that, I'll hand it over to our facilitator, Lindsay, if she's on. I don't see. Yes, I do see her.
I
Yes.
am.
Yeah, we had a slight change of plans just a few minutes ago. So before Lindsay kicks us off, we're going to toss it over to David Gerstenfeld with the Oregon Employment Department to give us a bit of an update on current happenings in his neck of the woods. David?
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. And thanks, Todd. And hi, everyone. I had several updates to share. One is kind of around agency leadership. I originally was going to share that Janine Beatrice, who's our agency deputy, is leaving, and she is going over to Oregon Youth Authority to help them out. And that is effective next Monday. So I was originally going to share that. That is still the case. That's a big loss for the agency. She's been with us since shortly before the pandemic and has really been helpful. Since then, there's also been news that effective June 16th, I will be leaving my role here at the Employment Department and going over to be the director at the Department of Revenue. Andrew Stolfi, who some of you may know, who is the director at the Department of Consumer and Business Services, will be coming to the Employment Department. So all of us who are shifting seats are working together to make this a smooth transition. I'll be meeting with Andrew, getting him up to speed. I'm sure as he gets settled in, he will want to probably meet with you, Todd, and otherwise get engaged and be an active member of this board. But wanted to share that update. Again, that will be effective in mid-June. The two other things that I wanted to share are both kind of related to our operations and our budget. We gave our agency budget presentation a little over a month ago now, I think, and we are going next Wednesday for our phase 2. And what we're talking about are some adjustments that we need to make to the governor's recommended budget because of really two fundamental things that have changed. And I'll talk about it in two chunks. One is the Trade Adjustment Act, which is one of those federal workforce programs that the Employment Department administers. We work with our partners in the workforce system, and it's really an area where Oregon stands out as a national leader. I think we've had our team meet with two different secretaries of labor at the national level talking about our Trade Act program. Our program leader has testified to Congress about it. It helps people who are unemployed because of the impacts of foreign trade get training so that they can go into a new career. Over the years, the program has sunset at the federal level and then been reauthorized. And it's kind of had this regular cycle. Unfortunately, it sunset in 2022 and has not yet been reauthorized. And it does not look like that reauthorization is imminent. So that means that we have a small number of people that are still able to get benefits, but no new petitions for business closures or layoffs can be approved by the federal government unless and until Congress reauthorizes the Trade Act program. We have, just to give a sense of how much this can impact, in Oregon, we have petitions that cover just under 17,000 Oregon workers waiting to be approved by the Department of Labor in case the law is reauthorized. That's just under 11% of all of the workers covered by potential trade petitions throughout the nation. So Oregon has a lot of that. It offers a lot of extra support for people. But because it isn't reauthorized, we have to scale that program back and make adjustments. We've already made adjustments now, and that will be reflected ongoing in our budget. That means reducing 92 positions from our agency that were funded by the Trade Act program. We have been able to do this without a layoff. So we've kept our skilled workers, even if they're doing different programs than they had originally hoped to be doing. But it means this program really isn't here to help us retrain those workers, and it's a good tool for helping businesses that need a skilled workforce because it can help get people trained up fully to enter where we need that. So unfortunately, there's not much that can be done at the state level, but we have to reflect this in our budget. If it does get reauthorized at the federal level, we will go back to the legislature, and I'm pretty confident we'll be able to quickly get authorization to scale back up. Kind of adding to that bad news, separate from that, the projected revenue for our agency is down pretty significantly now from what it was when the governor's recommended budget was developed. Based on the most recent statewide economic forecast that came out a few weeks ago, there's a gap of about $51.6 million. So we'll be talking at our phase 2 budget presentation about if we do not get any more revenue, the adjustments that we have to make to have a balanced budget, which is what the legislature has to pass. It would mean getting rid of our policy packages that had proposed adding a few positions to our agency. And it would mean getting rid of other positions. So it would be a reduction from the governor's recommended budget of another 74 positions besides those impacted by the Trade Act. We're very worried about this because we've been really focused on customer service, and there's no way to cut 74 positions without it impacting customer service levels. The impacts would be across pretty much all parts of the agency. Unemployment insurance is the area where we're kind of having the biggest pain points right now, so we tried to minimize the impacts there, although they will have some. It likely would include us closing one of our WorkSource Oregon centers if we have to do that. The thing that we're doing in parallel that we'll also be talking about is with the governor's office, we're looking to increase the what we call CDAF, state revenue stream, so that we do not have to make those cuts. So the legislature will have a policy choice as to whether to make those cuts or to increase that CDAF diversion rate. I'm happy to go into more detail, but at a high level, that CDAF rate is really when employers pay their unemployment insurance tax, how much of it we can, with legislative approval, use for administrative purposes. So it wouldn't actually increase the dollar amount of any of the bills that businesses get for their unemployment insurance tax. They would pay the same amount. It would just allow a little bit more to be used for administrative purposes. That will require a statutory change, and we are working with the governor's office and the House Revenue Committee and hope to see that move forward pretty soon. But again, we have to prepare in case it doesn't pass that we would need to make those reductions. And I'm hoping that at the next meeting I'm at, before I'm in my new role, that I have much cheerier news to share, but wanted to keep you all informed since it would have some impact on the employment department's part, at least in the workforce work that we all do.
Thank you, David. I guess it's back over to you, Lindsay.
Okay, and also happy if anybody has questions, just based on what David just went over. I don't want to rush through that too much. So any questions or comments?
No, I was just going to say thank you, David, and it's been great working with you. I look forward to the update in the June meeting. I'm glad that you'll be here with us to understand what the impact of these budget cuts are going to be. So thank you for sharing that.
Any other thoughts or comments? Okay. Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you, Venkat. Well, we will dive back in. So yes, as Venkat said, this is the second of the virtual planning sessions. We have 3 total. So we will have our last planning session next Friday, April 4th. And so last time, we spent quite a bit of time really just making sure that we understood the strategic plan front page. So we sort of went back again and we looked at those pieces, including the vision and the mission and the position and values. And so we have made some changes to that. And so today what we want to be able to do is go part by part through the changes. I want to invite you to consider that this is very much just trying things on. And so when we get to the point where we are sharing screen and looking through this, we'll be going point by point and trying on how it feels. That also means that this draft of the strategic plan as is and the integrated scorecard, because that's what we have tried to do, is integrate the two together, is in draft form. Absolutely draft form. So there's some messiness. We need to know where the language needs to be tightened. We need to know where I misinterpreted something, or where we now see it in front of us and it feels off or it feels really good. So that's what we're going to be spending our time today on. And so that does mean, as you can see per the agenda, really making sure that the metrics are what we want to see. Currently, there are about a dozen metrics across different levels, because remember we talked board level, public workforce system level, as well as larger system level. And we have, per Soup's guidance, and Soup will join us in the next hour today, really made distinctions between the population metrics or population indicators, as well as the actual performance metrics. And so those are integrated in to the draft scorecard, which you will see. So again, we want to try them on, we want to see how they feel, and we want to make adjustments. We want to also then spend some time on what I call the integrity and feasibility filter, right? So really then looking at the changes and suggested changes that we're making and checking back. Does this actually support? Can we see a line of sight to prosperity for all Oregonians? And that's our integrity measure, right? Are we really making sure that we have the line of sight back to our vision and our mission as well? And then secondly, feasibility. Now, the feasibility piece is, can this be collected, but balanced with integrity? And so one thing I do want to also invite all of you to consider is that you want metrics that are collectible, obviously, and feasible to gather. You also don't want to shrink yourself down to be bite-sized to whoever, right? To whatever. You want to still really be upholding your vision and how far you want to push. And so I invite you as a board to make sure that you're balancing these two things out. So if certain metrics feel like you have never done this before, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are not within the feasible category. So that's just the one thing that I will say going into this. Hopefully that will get us to a point where we can go through another round of edits and changes so that by next Friday we have something that is really feeling good and strong. And at that point, just so you know the process going forward, I will be engaging one-on-one again via survey and probably some phone calls to really make sure we're capturing thoughts and ideas and input from folks who haven't been able to make all of the planning sessions and those who will have very thoughtful input but have not been involved so far. So that's my introduction. I would love, again, if Aaliyah, if you don't mind, I love knowing who is on. I'm kind of just keeping track of who has been able to be at the full retreat, at the session last week, and then today. And so if we can do a round of introductions, it shouldn't take too long. That would be really helpful. So Aaliyah, if you can support that, I would welcome it.
Absolutely. I'll go through my participants list and introduce yourself. We'll start with Ann Mercereau.
Hi, everyone. My name's Ann Mercereau, and I'm excited to be here with all of you. And my role is immediate past chair.
Next, we have Ben Cannon.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Ben Cannon, Executive Director of the HEC and member of the Workforce Talent Development Board.
Next, Maggie 4.
Good morning. I'm the Healthcare Industry Consortium Strategist with HEC, and it's nice to be here. Thank you.
David Gerstenfeld.
Hello again, everyone. I think I already introduced myself, but glad to be here.
Venkat.
Good morning, Venkat, currently Vice Chair of the Workforce and Talent Development Board, and I've attended all the strategic planning meetings so far.
Next, Ken Madden.
Hi, I'm Ken Madden. I own Madden Industrial Craftsman and Madden Fabrication in Portland, Lou, and I'm a member of the Workforce Talent and Development Board.
Lori Silverman.
Good morning, everybody. Lori Silverman, Chief Programs Officer at Age Plus. We've been at all the sessions. We've been delighted to be invited and participate on behalf of older adults all across Oregon. Thank you.
Clay Martin.
Hello, Clay Martin. I am an analyst with the Office of Workforce Investments at the HEC and have been involved behind the scenes for all of the meetings.
Lindy Messer.
Hi, I'm Lindy. I'm Lindy Messer. I'm a research analyst at HEC in research and data.
Nicole Moody.
And I am Vice President of HR at Aviva Health. I'm just listening in as an observer, just trying to see what all is happening in the state of Oregon for workforce development.
Allison Orr.
Hi, I'm Allison Orr. I'm also an analyst for Office of Workforce Investments with the HEC.
Jason Payton.
Good morning, Jason Payton, occupational economist with the Oregon Employment Department's Workforce and Economic Research Division. It's great to be with you this morning.
Kathy Reynolds.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kathy. I'm a Vice President, Talent Management, People Analytics for Legacy Health, and I'm also on the State Workforce Board. Nice to see you all.
Jonathan Scrementi.
Good morning, Jonathan Scrementi, representing Oregon Commission for the Blind. I am the WIOA manager.
Sherry Dunn.
I am Sherry Dunn, the chair of the Workforce Talent Development Board, and I have been at all but one meeting.
Stephanie Smolin.
Good morning, everybody. Stephanie Smolin with the Oregon Employment Department, Workforce Operations. I'm Data and Regulatory Analyst.
Julia Steinberger.
Good morning, Julia Steinberger, Director of the Office of Workforce Investments at the HEC. I was at the first retreat, and then I only was able to be on for a little bit at the last session.
Kurt Tackman.
Good morning. My name is Kurt Tackman. I am a Deputy Director with the Office of Workforce Investments under the HEC, and WIOA Title 1 programs are in my portfolio. Thanks.
Brenda Turner.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Brenda Turner. I'm a research analyst at the Employment Department in the Research Division.
And Todd Nell.
Thanks, Leah. Good morning, everybody. Todd Nell, Director of the Workforce and Talent Development Board at the Higher Education Coordinating Commission.
And I am Aaliyah Sobolowski. I am Board Administrator for the Workforce and Talent Development Board in the Office of Workforce Investments. And that's everyone on my list, Lindsay.
Okay, that is great. Thank you, everyone, for doing that. It helps me. I'm sure you all know each other very well, but I'm still remembering. So that is very helpful to also just get a reminder of who has been here from the beginning. So for those of you who were not able to attend the last session, do feel free to pause and raise hand and say, wait, how did we get here? So, it's okay for us to take a step back momentarily to make sure everyone is caught up. So with that, I think, Aaliyah, what we'll do, if you can share the draft version that was sent out yesterday, we are going to just dive right in and again, go piece by piece here. So likely everyone will want to expand their screen, and Aaliyah, where you can, we can zoom in, but hopefully folks can see this okay. Thumbs up if you can. I'm not seeing any thumbs down, so okay, good. Lots of thumbs up floating up from the bottom of the screen. I forget that they appear in random places.
She was adjusting it. I was like, okay, now it's
I got it. Okay.
I'm happy
Okay.
to zoom in on certain sections as well if you'd like, Lindsay. Just let me know.
Okay, no, that's totally fine. So we did spend some time last week talking about this. Not a lot of changes. You know, I think that you did all agree that some of the wording was passive. And we don't want that. And so we wanted to sort of switch some things around. And so you'll notice that certainly with the mission. And so let's just do a check on that. We changed it to empower Oregon's people and employers by informing and shaping a coordinated education and training system responsive to their needs. So are there any strong reactions to that? Does that feel more active? Does it feel like the work that you do? Thumbs up. Great. Lots of thumbs up. Good. Okay. Okay. Ken, please.
I hit the hand raise instead of the thumbs up, but I'm a thumbs up on that one.
Okay, that's great. Great. Okay. So under position, we did not make a lot of changes. That does not mean that we can't. And so that might be something that individual comments you are free to send in. You all should have my email by now, lindsay@woolseygroup.com. And so for anybody who just wants to send comments and thoughts, you can always do that. And I will be incorporating things in. Again, the only change that we made per my notes and recollection was one word, just again, promoting didn't seem right. And so providing accountability, being the provider of among workforce partners seemed more accurate. So unless others have in their notes or ideas, I would love to hear. Todd, yes.
I'm going to channel Ben Cannon here because I'm not sure if it was, I'm going back to the mission. I'm not sure if it was under the mission that Ben made a note that he didn't see the word workforce or if that was somewhere else. Regardless, I wonder, is empower Oregon's people and employers by informing and shaping a coordinated workforce education and training or education and training and workforce system? In other words, does the workforce word need to be integrated into the or not? Just flagging that, as I remember, as I said, from Ben's statement in our last meeting.
Yep, that's a great point. Ben, do you have strong thoughts on where you felt that was missing as a label?
It was the mission. I just felt like
okay.
Given that it's in the board's name, that should be in the mission too. And I think it says things that, you know, it's meaningful to people. And I think you could actually put it right before, maybe before training or, yeah. But so any of Todd's suggestions, I think, get there.
Okay. And not to be nitpicky here, but is it informing and shaping a coordinated workforce development education and training system, or is it workforce?
Yeah, I mean, I think of, so it currently says education and training system. I think that in my mind, that is synonymous with our workforce development system. So how to incorporate the word workforce. I like that it says education and training. We use that a lot at the HAC to denote the larger ecosystem of workforce development. So how you, but I don't have strong feelings about how you add the word workforce
Okay, great.
Does it make sense to replace people with workforce, or is that too restrictive? Empower Oregon's workforce and employers?
How do people feel about that?
Yeah, when I first looked at it, I thought that might be a good place to go. Saying workforce writ large goes back to our first discussion in person about what is our scope of authority. And so I think in moving people to workforce and employers by informing, sharing, coordinating, because the education development is in the rest of it, the training, I mean, you're actually describing it. So I don't think you have to say development. But I think Venkat's point of just switching out people with workforce will work to me.
Okay. Okay, great. Anything else? Okay. So the other suggestion that was made was, and if you could just move up slightly, Aaliyah, so we can see, was actually go, yep, there we go. I just want to see the agreement. So the other suggestion was instead of having multiple documents and guiding documents floating around, how do we actually begin to bring these together a little bit more? And so replacing the 3 values with the actual agreements that you all had come up with. And so I realized that some of these agreements were intended to sort of be internal, right? Agreements and guiding principles among board members. But then what I also heard was these are very, very similar to the value statements and what who we want to be. So I am curious how this feels, and would we make any changes in the agreements if we agree that they belong here as part of your strategic plan document?
The only thing, I mean, yes, it was designed to be an internal document, for how we interact with each other and how we, treat each other, that type of thing. I can see it having good value. I note that the 3 elements at the top, collaborative and bold, they show up, but inclusive does not. So in the work collaboratively, transparency, data, bold, inclusive, collaborative and bold find a home, but inclusive doesn't. So if we do use these agreements, it may not be it could be a sub of one of the ones there, but it should find a home also. So I guess that would be my only addition.
Yes, that's great. Other thoughts? Todd, go ahead.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, I was just wondering, maybe one thing to consider, inclusive might be able to get, I wanted to sort of respect the work that Sherry led around the agreements that you're speaking to and capture what she just said. I wonder if it would be possible to move inclusive up to our reputation. I don't know if that makes sense, but one extra bullet there might be an easier thing to do than try to integrate it and break up that good work on agreements.
How do people feel about that? Is that it rises up to potentially reputation? I mean, you can make the case in many ways here, right? But that's a very good point. It could also see it being integrated under the bold and innovative, because when I read those words, boldness and vision and action, betterment and beneficial innovation, to me, what the culture, I think, and what you all as a board are trying to push, you could see that means inclusivity as well. So Anne, what are you thinking?
Well, until you said that, I was going to agree with Todd because I had a similar thought. Like we could put it in reputation, and then that would indicate that we had done so well at our agreements that now we're known for this. But what I like about including it, now that you've said that, Lindsay, and clouded my thinking, it occurs to me that we do a decent job of reviewing those agreements with some regularity. And so to be reminded of that, and we wouldn't really remind the group about our reputation, you know? So if we wanted to be more action oriented in terms of like how we show up, probably should be in the agreements. But if we feel like, no, we got this, we're doing this really well, then we should put it in reputation. Like, I guess if we've arrived or whatever, or we think we're on our way to arriving.
Yeah. Yeah. So point being that you sort of have to earn that in your reputation, right? But you do review their agreements quite regularly. I really, and by the way, as facilitator, I should be doing the opposite of clouding your thinking, Anne. So shame on me. Venkat, what are your thoughts?
So just to the inclusivity side of things, I believe it is a part of culture, like you said. So I don't really have a strong opinion of where it goes, but it seems to fit in better with bold and innovative. That's my thought on it. And then secondly, Lindsay, if I may, if I look over at the overall strategic plan draft, one thing that strikes me based on previous conversations is that we brought up this feeling of identifying our customers and being a little bit more customer centric. The board has a set of primary customers, and maybe they're the governor and the legislature. And then there are the secondary customers who we serve, which is the workforce, right? Job seekers and people. So somewhere a column about who we serve would be really helpful to me.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that you are bringing that up again, Venkat, because yes, that was brought up last time also at the retreat. When we get to the metrics, we will see how that piece has been worked in, but we need to decide if it is effective or not. But let's spend a minute on this because it is important enough to clarify the customers, right? And there's the customers of the board and the customers of the system, right? That I'm curious where it goes on this page. And while we're on that, how do you all view position? When you read the first sentence here, it's how the WTDB enables our mission. And those are your position statements. The partnering with workforce education and training entities, including local workforce boards. But is there, I'm curious, a strong statement missing here about those customers? Sherry?
Yeah, I think, well, two things. The first thing is I think the position is exactly where the customers should be discussed and in some sense are being discussed. We do have advising the governor and like that is our, we could say something like, providing value and advice or something to the governor. I don't know, like more customer centric, but that is where from my perspective, the position is where the customer should live. And I think we talked about the fact that it's us, the governor, agencies, the local workforce boards, but we don't jump over the boards to their ultimate customers. So I think the position already to some extent does clarify who our customers are. And then one other potential with inclusion is it could go in the mission. I mean, the mission could say, empower Oregon's workforce and employers by informing, shaping an inclusive, coordinated education training system responsive to their needs. Boom. I mean, it could in theory go there, and it probably should go there from a mission perspective rather than be buried. Bold and innovation are great, but it probably should go there because because inclusive includes many things. We talk about the frontier, we talk about rural, we talk about different needs. So I think it probably does maybe land in mission, but that's my thoughts.
So that mission would say empower Oregon's workforce and employers by informing and shaping a coordinated, inclusive workforce education and training system responsive to needs.
Yeah, to me,
okay.
But that's just me.
How many thumbs up are we, does that feel good to people? Okay, great. And
except that I think, Lindsay, you probably said workforce twice. So
I did.
You wanted, okay. And you intend to keep it there twice in that sentence?
You tell me. Is workforce replacing people and then we're just keeping coordinated education and training system?
Yeah, and adding inclusive in there.
Got it. Yep. Okay. Okay, that's good. Ken, you had your hand up, or was that a thumbs up again?
I was, I'm having problems with these symbols today. I was just gonna comment that I really liked Sherry's idea, and I think honestly, to me, especially when we're trying to put who we serve, you kind of in the mission statement state who that is. It might have been expanded a little bit, but I really like that, putting it in the mission portion.
Okay, great. Okay. Anything else then on this page? Because I think what I'd like to do is start diving into the next 2 pages, again, just to try on and see how things fit. I think that will also inform how we integrate the customers that you all identified more clearly into position statements without being duplicative. And I can make some changes and offer some suggestions that we can come back to. But is there anything else that anyone wants to touch on this page? Okay, let's move to this next page. So what we have done is we have created 2 pages. We have kept the imperatives almost identical. I think, in fact, they are to what they have been. We have checked in multiple times with all of you that are these still the imperatives? Are we missing something? Is this right? Now, I did sort of change the order of them. So we have inclusive workforce system that advances equitable prosperity up top, and then we have the strategic and close alignment next. And Aaliyah, if you can just go to the next page, you will see that then we have clear understanding of and improved use and impact of the workforce system, and then that the WTDB is embraced by the governor as an accountable convener, empowered facilitator, and informed advisor. So we have made some changes to the objectives based on our last conversations that we'll go through. And then we have suggestions and ideas based on input that I have heard from you, what we have heard in conversation, and individuals have sent in some ideas. And so this is what we're going to go through. The targets are still to be determined. So again, these are just suggestions and ideas, with the idea that we will similarly be able to track your progress toward those targets with some simple green, yellow, red. Where are we at? And so you determine how often you want to be able to do that. That will also, of course, depend on feasibility, right, of actual collection of these metrics. So let's go back up to the middle page, Aaliyah. Thank you for managing that. And let's dive in. So the only change that we made to the objectives of this was to remove the Prosperity 10,000, which I think everyone agreed was 24, 20 or 23, 24. So for 24-25, we have the three that were in there before: increasing diverse access and participation in all public workforce programs, increasing awareness of genuine workforce barriers and challenges, spark innovation, addressing equitable prosperity. So we agreed that we liked the idea of being able to track and understand population indicators and performance metrics, right? And so also attached to this deck are reminders of those definitions. And so Aaliyah, if you can go down to the 4th page, I believe. There we go. Soup provided this. So just as a reminder, population indicators are indicators of well-being of populations, right? And so that is quite different then from performance measures, which is how well is the board, is the public workforce system, and the larger system actually moving the needle toward your mission, toward your imperatives and objectives. So that's just a reminder of the difference there. So let's go back up to the 2nd slide. Thank you, Aaliyah, for doing this. So let's just try on some of the suggestions for the first imperative. And so for the larger workforce system, again, the definition that you all agreed to and reviewed at your board meeting after the retreat, here are some ideas of population indicators. Certainly participation rates by groups, right? And you already, many of your local workforce boards, right, collect by certain groups. And so it should not be hard to identify the groups that you want to track. This may also be something you consider as changing, right? Depending on what you're discovering with data and where more tracking needs to be done. Certainly completion rates, and one thing that was mentioned quite specifically was completion rates in high demand career credentials by the same breakdown in disaggregated data by group, and then employment and retention rates. Now, you'll certainly notice that these are metrics that are mostly already integrated into your public WIOA performance metrics, right? So when we check the feasibility box, right, there's something to be said there. You don't want to create more work for yourself if these are the right ways to track these objectives and imperatives. Performance metrics, increased understanding of barriers to employment. How would you know that there is increased understanding by the board, right? And by the system and partners. So target potentially standardized and disaggregated tracking of participant barriers to employment post-quarter or year. Now, Kurt, this is something that Kurt Tackman sent in and had a bit of explanation. And so before maybe, Kurt, I call on you, the other one here under performance metrics is roll up and demonstrated understanding of program innovations that increase the population indicators by group that you are caring about and targeting specifically, right? And then quarterly analysis leading to board recommendations to governor and agency partner leadership. So that's a lot, but again, what we want to discuss is, do these targets, especially if we can peel them apart and really understand what's going to be feasible for collection, track back to the suggested metrics? And do these metrics then, can you see a line of sight to the objectives and this imperative? Kurt, do you want to spend a minute or two, or whatever you need, describing your thoughts for how we might track participant barriers to employment post-quarter or year?
Sure. Thank you, Lindsay. Unabashedly, I'll admit I come from the WIOA land, and since that's the law that like authorizes and pulls a state workforce board into being, I always kind of start there. I kind of revert to that place. All of the WIOA titled programs under all the titles require the programs to report on what they call barriers to employment of their participants. And those are well defined. There's a list of them according to WIOA. And since we collect that participant data, admittedly, a lot of it may be self-disclosed by the participant, but at least we have breakdowns to how many individuals have these perceived barriers as an aggregated group, and then we can disaggregate into the type of barriers according to the federal definitions, the type of barriers that individuals have, and we could kind of see the population of those with barriers that are being served. So you can get to the pregnant or parenting teen, runaway, low income. There's a long list, but that's what was my thought process behind suggesting that.
Great. Questions or thoughts? Ken, please.
When I see that proportional populations, I guess I go from an employer's standpoint and jump immediately to the EEO1 report that most employers have to fill out, which is a demographic of nationality, or not nationalities, but
Gender and race.
yeah. And I don't know if that makes sense from everybody's perspective, but from mine, that would make more sense to me.
Julia, do you have thoughts on that or related? Not on that one.
Mine was something different. Yeah.
Okay. So Ken, let's just spend a minute. So you are saying, does it make more sense to use the EEO1 report to get this information, or clarify your question?
I mean, from my perspective, it would show me the categories on where we're making progress, because that's what an employer typically, not all employers, because you have to read a certain benchmark in order to qualify to fill out EEO1 information. But but having that information as an employer, if I was looking at this, I would say, yeah, okay, we're making progress in certain areas. It would tell me or relate more to my experience, I guess.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Other thoughts on that point? And I guess my other question then is, anyone who has ideas on this proportional to population piece, and how, and if, is this information as baseline available? And to Ken's point, then that's got to be a necessary piece to show progress, or not, right? If you're an employer filling out an EEO form. Does this seem outlandish? Or does it seem like this could be done?
I have a question. Oops, sorry, Kirk, go ahead.
You're on mute, Kirk.
Sorry, thank you. I always let you speak, but thanks. I didn't mean to jump in. The first question is, I don't know where the EEO reports would be like consolidated or reported from. So I'm just wondering where I kind of jumped to where data sources that I'm familiar with. If they exist, that'd be great. I just don't know where they are.
And I'm with Kurt on that. And I guess my question is clarification of the objective. Because my first off, my mind goes to the U.S. Census Bureau in terms of what are we comparing to? Are we trying to compare available workforce to the population in Oregon? If that's the case, it would be my inclination to go U.S. Census Bureau. Are we trying to group by ethnicity, race? Are we trying to identify those? That's where I'm coming back to. What was the objective? I had to step away for just a minute, so I think I've missed something. And the other thought I have is in terms of data that's available for reporting out the emerging workforce, I think of federal reporting kind of dictates the categories that we observe. So that I have that in mind as well. I don't know if that answered the question. Again, I might be off base on what we're trying to do.
No, Stephanie, I think it informs the question very well, because I think what you all as board and stakeholders have to determine is, do we have this information as we want to see it? And how do we even know how we want to see it, right? The groups and the proportional breakdown so that we can demonstrate progress, right, over baseline. So that is a really important, I think, clarification. And then secondly, what is already dictated that we have to collect, right? And we check that for WIOA, or it helps us get to what we want to collect. Or what do we need to add, and where do we get that data? Is it the U.S. Census Bureau? Is it somehow, as to Kurt's point, making sure we know how to integrate in the EEO, reports? And this is something that you all have talked about actually for a number of years, is how does the board even be or begin to be a place where data gets integrated, because you have lots of pockets of data and information, right? And we know that to be true. And so does this become at least a runway toward being able to bring some of these pieces together? So that's a lot, but I think it is all really important. And Stephanie, I think your questions inform that. So let's keep going. Julia, you just dropped your hand, but you'd had it up for a while. Do you want to make a quick comment?
Yeah, I guess I will. You mentioned, or several folks have mentioned, WIOA reporting, which is, great. It's something we have access to. However, I think getting similar data from community colleges and universities, if we want to integrate everything, might be a little challenging. For example, barriers to employment. I think there's some crossover, like English language learners might be captured both by WIOA and colleges and universities, but I think some others would not. So I think there would be a decent amount of work trying to crosswalk that. So just sharing that.
So again, yes. So when we talk about feasibility, this is a really important one, right? And we will get to some other metrics when we get down to the fourth level here of that relate to how do we get the board to be, again, at least a runway toward this vision of trying to integrate and be a source where multiple data points can roll up. Again, per your definition of the larger system. So when the governor asks, but what about impact on XYZ populations, we can actually pull from multiple sources. And what's the starting point, I think, is part of your point, Julia, because this is hard to do.
Yeah, and I just feasibility in general. The board doesn't have somebody that can do this. So I think we need to think about leveraging teams like PRISM, which this is very similar to PRISM's intent, and potentially Oregon Longitudinal Data Collaborative and other systems, because
Yep, great. Okay, Jason, I would love to hear from you, and then Ken and Venkat. Or wait, there's a third person, but Jason, let's start with you.
Thanks, Lindsay. I just wanted to raise up a couple things when we talked about EEO programs. And Ken, I don't know exactly in terms of how those business reports are consolidated or aggregated, but our experience on the research side of the employment department has been working with policymakers around the state using U.S. Census equal employment opportunity aggregations and estimates to talk about the population side of that that ledger effectively, sort of that. So because it sounds like we're talking about two different things of comparison: the technical data of our workforce customers and education training programs, and comparing that to some type of population. So if EEO is a metric, there is some resources that might be able to take a look at, with the caveat being is, maybe next week those things may not exist with the U.S. Census. That's kind of a thing that's happening these days. The other aspect is that I think, going back to some of the sort of starting guidelines for today's meeting about considerations and what Lindsay was laying out with, asking those questions. Maybe this is a good example of maybe documenting a handful of these. Well, we've got 4 or 5, half a dozen data analysts here from different agencies. Maybe there's a list we can start generating between now and the next meeting to kind of list out, does this thing exist? What would we be able to leverage between HEC, employment department, national sources to answer those questions? Because I feel like, especially when I met with folks on this board, a lot of the conversations I end up, saying, well, that doesn't exist. That's not possible. And I just don't want to be the wet blanket for the next, hour and 15 minutes and say, like, that's not, I don't want to, dampen that aspiration and goal. So I'm going to try and document things, but maybe this process could document a few lists like that and send out as a follow-up QA to the analysts on this meeting to say, does this exist, and can we actually provide something equivalent to that to the board in any way?
Yeah, that is fantastic, Jason. And I appreciate that because I think putting this together, it was very clear that we are going to have some homework, if you will, and some assignments. And so does this exist? What does exist that we can leverage? I think another good question could be, what would be progress toward making these a reality in terms of being able to collect them? Again, the runway idea in 6 months or in 1 year. And again, who and what would we have to leverage? So that would be, I think, a very powerful exercise to do coming out of this meeting. So thank you for that and for volunteering. Todd, you had your hand up, and is it helpful to still have the document in front of us? I want to ask that. Do people want it back up in front of us? Yes. Okay. So if we could share that again. I know it's hard to not be able to see people, but that's perfect. Thank you. Okay. Todd, did you have your hand up still?
Yeah, I just wanted to say I had similar thoughts, but different slightly than Julia and what Ben put in the chat. I wonder, and also I was channeling Venkat. When I read that first bullet, increase diverse access and participation in all public workforce programs, I'm thinking under the metrics column where you have in parenthetics, larger or entire workforce system. So I was wondering what's missing. Ben kind of touched on that in his chat comment about higher ed or post-secondary. What about, so in my mind, what about community colleges and universities? And then the other one was, what about K-12? I know that Venkat has voiced repeatedly how it's alarming that the state of Oregon's test scores in science and math are ranked 46 in the country. And that also makes me think of things like high school graduation rate. So I don't know what that all means, Lindsay. I don't know if additional groups need to be called out specifically, or if there's a way to include them in sort of a higher objective piece of language.
So that, yeah, these are all really, really good points. And here's something, Aaliyah, can we jump to the next page just to sort of put something out on the table? We're just going to keep putting things out on the table here. The table's going to be full. But part of the question here, and again, this goes to Jason's point of what do we already have? What can we already leverage? But other state boards who similarly are trying to track the larger system, right? And are we actually providing what industry needs? Venkat, to your point in the chat as well, and closing skill gaps, and then moving the needle for certain populations, right? Other state boards have been able to identify certain metrics that then the governor is able to make a call for, right? Because it's very difficult otherwise, right? I mean, so this does involve that parallel track that relates to your fourth imperative, right? Which is, do we have the ear of the governor? And are we not only just, are we not only the advisors to the governor, but to the point where a governor might recognize that this could be a source of integrated data on metrics that matter. So I highlight that because a suggested target, right, is can the governor call for joint reporting on larger workforce system population indicators? And if that's an executive order, great, or if it's something else, but does that really help to bring these different systems and what's already out there together, including colleges, universities, even, some of your other customers out there, including the local workforce boards and community-based organizations. So I just want to put that out there as well, because part of the vision here, I think, has to be how are these tracks moving in a way that will come together so that you have something to show in 6 months, in a year, and in 2 years. Can we go back to the previous page? And then, so Todd, I don't know if that sort of addresses some of what you are saying. Ken and then Lori.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify, the EEOC one. Our company, it's easy to pull a report on that. So I wouldn't want the state to bend over backwards to try to accommodate me on reporting. But I just think if one of your targeted customers is an employer, it should have some language that can relate back to them, or at least some guideline that relates back to an employer. And then the other question, just looking at the metrics, section on that first inclusive workforce, when it says employment retention rates by groups, how does the state handle that for seasonal work or transitory work? For like agriculture, like firefighting, like construction to some degree even has that ability, because that can really skew a number substantially. If those are included as permanent, employment positions, is that being broken out when that is being, targeted for success rates?
Great question. Is there somebody on who has an answer for that? Venkat, did you? No. Okay. Okay. Then it's noted, Ken, because absolutely it's a great question. I'm sure there is somebody who has that answer. I know this comes up frequently. So in other states at least.
I would think so. I mean, I'm just looking from a staffing perspective. We have permanent positions, we have temp to perm positions, and then we have what would be considered strictly temp. And and so in that way, it falls into an employment, category. Mine's more specific to our industry, but what we really find is that temp can really skew the numbers substantially compared to what you would consider permanent retention rates. And so I would assume that would affect the rate too, because you see that with entertainment as well. You see that with like ski seasons and summer work. you'll see large scale ups to fill certain gaps, and it really can mess with if you're gonna target retention rates, it's really going to skew that number if it isn't factored in some way.
So one thing too to consider, and then I think folks have some answers or some suggestions here, is certainly, is it we certainly WIOA requires some of this, and so again we put that on the table as some must do's here, right? But is there a metric that will measure better what you are trying to go for here, right? And so if advancing equitable prosperity, employment and retention rates by certain populations, right, that are going to demonstrate equitable prosperity, if those aren't going to do it, and it ends up being a job quality metric, right, or a quality of life metric, like do our seasonal workers have multiple seasons of work, right, so that things are strung together. I know there are places that experiment with how to measure that in place of retention metrics, precisely for the points that you're making, Ken. And so what does that look like? And then what behavior does that incentivize to change even around how you support seasonal or part-time workers who still need benefits at a consistent level, right? So I know there's experimentation out there. David, did you have a specific answer to that piece?
Just that I don't think that the data that we collect has a way of fully parsing that out. We know who works where and in what quarter. So I do think if you're setting long-term goals, you could probably start to account for it somewhat by looking at industries and saying, not set one target for the statewide workforce, but maybe parse it out differently, and there is some room to look at it there. But the other point I was going to make is I think what you just did, which is that perhaps retention isn't, maybe it's one of the metrics, but maybe it's not the sole one, or it's in conjunction with something about if somebody has seasonal work and it's working the way that they want, that's the lifestyle, and it works for them, that's great. Just measuring retention, if people are staying in jobs that aren't allowing them to adequately get by because they have no other options, that would be a great retention rate and really bad for what the system should be trying to do.
Those are great points. Okay. Lori.
Great discussion. I just, I want to check my optimism. Is this proportional population really the opportunity to follow the demographic shift that we're seeing with our aging population? Is this where we're going to be able to capture some metrics about whether our workforce is matching our overall aging population and focusing our lens towards where the population growth is happening as opposed to where it is shrinking? I just want to check because it feels like that, but I'm really happy about it, but I'm not sure I'm correct.
Yeah. So great question, right? I mean, the and others weigh in here too, but the idea behind, right, proportional to population is precisely what you're describing, right? How, what is the makeup of Oregon's population, and are we serving each of those groups proportionally and seeing impact in each of those groups proportionally? And are we able to collect and track the data well enough for the shifts that are happening and not have the data lag too much, right? Obviously. So yes, and any comments folks have on that? Is that optimistic, or is that just what should be happening if we're talking inclusive and equitable for Oregonians? Ben, do you want to jump in, and then Sherry?
Yeah, sure. I mean, really quick to Lori. Yeah, I think that would be the primary purpose, I think, of looking at these types of measures in proportion to population by group, whether that's age group, rural, urban, race, ethnicity, or other sort of cuts. What I was going to say, I was, however, going to express some caution around around sort of global measures of workforce training, education and training participation and completion, in part because I think there's considerable overlap here with the HEC's reporting and charge, right? The Higher Education Coordinating Commission takes a global view of education and training after high school. So it does leave out the K-12 piece of this, which is considerable, but with everything else, apprenticeship, enrollment in private career schools, colleges and universities, WIOA programs, et cetera, we are measuring and attempting to report on participation rates, including to the extent that we can in some disaggregated ways. I don't know how far we've gone in terms of the proportionality, but I don't want to set us up to sort of be running on parallel tracks there. But furthermore, I think the need and the opportunity for this board is to really highlight in a industry specific or occupation specific ways where there are gaps and opportunities. I think that's because I think that gets directly to the workforce question, right? There's a whole lot of reasons for education and training after high school. A very important one, and the one that this board is really singularly focused on, is workforce, right? Preparation for work and the employer's needs for skilled workers. And that's where I'm actually interested in this board doing less of the sort of holistic global, how are we doing in terms of workforce system participation, workforce development participation. I'm much more interested in it saying, sort of Venkat had the example related to, the semiconductor workforce. You can go so on down the list. And that's where I think this board can, to Julia's point, sort of capture the attention of policymakers by saying, look, we've identified it within this particular industry, either participation and training is not equitable and inclusive, it's falling far short of demand, there's an oversupply. I mean, that's where I think this board has particular opportunity for influence.
Okay, that's great, Ben. And I do think that the board has to answer this question because yes, you do not want to duplicate what's being collected. At the same time, part of the work here that everybody has sort of leaned into is how are we actually doing a better job in integrating, data sets and reporting. But does this board want these metrics to always have the backdrop of high demand sectors, right? I mean, is that part of this board's and the workforce systems mandates, right, is that you are always paying attention to the needs of employers and industry, and does that then require the I hate to say it, but the picking and choosing, right? Because that's a political pitfall that I would say 20 years ago, people never wanted to do that. But in fact, now we have a much better understanding. Public resources, right, need to go where there's more bang for your buck. And so is this a backdrop that these metrics for the workforce board and the workforce system want to have? And so that is captured certainly in the number 2 here, completion rates in high demand career credentials. Is that something that would be important? Sherry.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things. Just listening to the conversation. I don't think it's either or with the HEC. I think for the state board, what would be great, I think, for us, Ben, is if we could identify certain things we need from the HEC to tell us that you already have, that we could fold into that information. So I agree, we don't need to redo it. I mean, if you already have that information, I think it's more imperative that we identify as the state board what information we need from the HEC, just as we would, any other agency, like what data do we need? The other thing that I was thinking about is how we utilize our local boards toward the data that we need, and how we might use surveying, which to some extent we do have, we do have consultancy work and we do have the summit and we do have these things that tell us that. But that being said, maybe there is some sort of surveying that we as a board do annually with either different sectors or employers. And then the final thing is circling back to the local boards. When I was running Dress for Success, we did this where with every client who came in, we established what their baseline income was when they came in. And then we would follow up within a year to see what their income was. Now, we could say we were attributable to everything, but we could say that if somebody came to us and their income was, $12 an hour, and then a year later when we did the survey, it was 25, we would say, hey, we helped these people, and now that is $25, and that is X number of $1 million into the local economy. And I wonder if we can help guide the local boards toward some data in that vein that would be helpful to them and us. So I'm thinking it's like multi-pronged, like pulling data from agencies that already have data. So our goal isn't to recreate what HEC has, but to identify what HEC has that we need. Our goal is to utilize the local boards and work with them on data, not just busy work data for us, but data that also will be useful for them. And our goal is to figure out, besides the summit and other consultancy, what is it that we want to know from employers that we might deploy some sort of standardized instrument to find out? So just based on this conversation, those are just some thoughts that came up to me.
That's great. That is great, Sherry. And I think we're going to get a couple more comments on this one, and then I want to have time to go through the other three. And this is exactly what we want to be doing during this session, is this level of discussion and ideas. But to your point, Sherry, of how do we actually start collecting baseline data that really is going to show the improvement that we want to see. And we're going to see that in the next section here, particularly. So Venkat.
Oh, so I just wanted to say that I think it is absolutely fine for us to leverage data from other agencies, because a lot of the data, as has been said before, exists already, but we can curate it in a form that will be useful to our customers, which is the governor and maybe the legislature. Because we talked a little bit at the first meeting about trying to be proactive, and so we can figure out what data would be most useful. And to that end, the industry discussions make a lot of sense to me, because I'm also part of the Semiconductor Council. So we're actually looking at industry identified gaps over time, right? So there's already a worker shortage in terms of about 2,000 workers per year up till 2030. And so there's a forecasted demand and how we are filling the gaps with our education system. So if we could do something similar for the high demand, high wage jobs and the largest economic sectors in Oregon, that would be wonderful. And I think we can be proactive in that sense.
Great. Okay, great. And that I think your and Sherry's comments, I do want to get to this next section here. But Sherry, to your point too, of how do we begin to get to some standardized collection, and by partnering with local workforce boards and community organizations, right, who are actually directly serving individuals. I think this is very similar to the first imperatives performance metrics, number 4 and 5, right? And how do we not overcomplicate this, but really begin to understand this information, right? So even being able to collect, as your Dress for Success example, what is your income right now? And did that improve in a year? Being able to collect information like, in your mind and in your life, what is the number one, barrier to you gaining employment at a living wage or at whatever it might want to be? And is that childcare, and is that housing, or is it, transportation, or is it something else? Similarly, then, how do you begin as a board, because you wanted to also make your meetings much more meaningful in terms of analysis? How do you get that information, have it roll up, and support analysis and understanding of what are the innovations that are having an impact on those barriers and on the indicators. So yes, to Sherry's point, I think, how do we get to that point of some standard collection that may not be being collected now? So let's move to the next imperative here, because this one for sure, I think relates to some of these points, especially how do we curate data collection and metrics to not only understand what industries we need to prioritize, right? But also what are the goals that the governor's interested in, that the legislature is going to be interested in, and that align with your vision and mission. So strategic and close alignment between education, economic development, workforce development, including public and private partners. So this is very much how are we actually improving collaboration and alignment across that larger workforce system that you have defined. And so when we think about metrics, part of this question, I think, embedded into this imperative and objective is if we are improving collaboration and alignment, we must be improving collaboration and alignment around some big shared goals. And so is this the place to put those big shared goals, to Venkat's point, that are the curated pieces that we want to be collecting on, that really reflect priorities? So what is in here is a combination of things that you all have mentioned, have put out on the table, ones that currently may not be being collected at a big level, but would demonstrate shared workforce goals across the larger entire system. So it could be change in unemployment rates by group, disaggregated. You could also do sort of the flip. It's the increase in employment in living wage jobs with benefits, right? I have seen other state boards try to tackle that. It requires some clear definitions and some consistent definitions for collection. Per your ideas of aligning with governor's current priorities, increased access to mental health providers by group, especially if that comes up and already has come up, right, as a significant barrier to obtaining quality employment. Increased access to affordable childcare or stable housing or others. So these are very open, and then the targets to be determined. It could be percent increase with supporting narratives. I think that's a really important part, is the supporting narratives. And so again, to Sherry's point, how would we standardize that and begin to collect, especially from the on the ground, where we're serving individuals directly. Performance metrics, again, how are we doing on this? Demonstrated alignment in agency policy and program guidance toward those shared workforce goals. So could you actually go back every quarter or 6 months or year and point to where agencies have aligned in policy and program guidance toward one of the shared goals that you have selected? Could you demonstrate alignment in program implementation for your other partners and customers, which are your workforce boards and your community-based organizations? So again, these are all to be tried on to see how they fit. So I'm curious, reactions, thoughts, and how would you get to some of these points? Also curious what this might look like as a try-on for the first 6 months. If you had to choose one, would it be access to mental health providers, because the governor has a significant initiative focused on that? Sherry.
Well, I try not to be too talky.
No, that's what we want.
You know, I do think that it would be great if we're talking about the next 6 months to tie it to an initiative. And I think the building, the housing initiative, if I'm describing it correctly, is probably the natural one. Because it hits on several elements. It hits on the workforce, it hits on readiness, it hits on equity, and it hits on inclusion, and it also hits on those other services such as childcare and, of course, housing. You know, I'm not saying it would be the only thing, but I'm saying if we had to think of a thing and in the next 6 months kind of make it one of our focuses, toward our other goal, toward our customer, is to have this value for our customer, who's the governor, that would make sense.
Great point. Reactions, thoughts? Anne.
I like what Sherry just said, and I think housing makes some sense, especially if we can demonstrate some either financial support or other means of demonstrating like it's a priority area for other things that we're doing to support that. So for example, we did a special project with, you know, something real, and it could be in one of the local workforce boards is related to housing. So it all starts to kind of knit together. And then I think people would feel some momentum and success. And then I think you could do more, pick other things that maybe are a little not quite as adjacent. I would try to find something that people who aren't really close to the work can say, oh, I get why they're doing that.
Got it. Julia?
Yeah, I think I'm struggling a little bit because there are so many factors that go into increased access to affordable housing or childcare or whatever. And so I just want to make sure we're able to hone in on the workforce system's role and look at data that is relevant to our role, because, you know, again, there are so many other factors like housing vouchers that we have no real relation to at this point.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I want to clarify, I certainly didn't mean to say that we would be over, you know, getting all that. But so when I hear from the governor's team is the governor would really value if we could say, hey, based on what we know, the childcare is a blockage for your inclusion desire, for, you know, not that we are fixing it, but that we can see it by having gotten that information. So if we say, oh, we understand, I forget what was the issue. We don't know how many diverse people are actually in the system. So if we're going to have a program we have to figure that out first. Like, I think the governor would appreciate us being able to give a heads up, early identification of the issues, but I don't mean for us to jump all the way into it. So that's what I was just only meaning. It's like, if we focused on her initiative around housing, like, then we could be of value in a way that I don't know if we've always been. So that's all I was thinking.
So Sherry, your point, I think this is important. Both of your points. I mean, Julia, yes, like you don't want to suddenly have crazy mission creep, right? And you're suddenly taking on affordable housing and getting into what the Department of Housing or whatever it might be. That is just absolutely not where you want to go. But Sherry, to your point, how does this governor's priority actually inform this board and the system that you partner with and have influence over to support an impact in that priority area? What's the sliver, right, of value add that this board and the workforce system contributes, especially when you're talking inclusivity and diversity? And when you go back up to your first imperative and you're understanding some of the bigger barriers to workforce success, right? Which is housing. Venkat, and then I think Todd. I'm trying to skim through here. Oh, Todd, you're number 4. Goodness, not all my hands are coming up. Venkat, and then Julia again, and then yeah, let's go with that.
Yeah, so I think it makes perfect sense to have an early win, but I would suggest creating a metric around housing and specifically workforce for housing construction. And we could get some data from Steve around this, and maybe that's a good starting point.
Great. Julia, you're unmuted.
Just another note that I
Thank
think
you.
it also that the early win also helps the board's credibility.
Yes, exactly. Again, none of these are mutually exclusive of each other. We want to knit these together. Okay, good. Julia, and then Kathy. Oh, you're on mute again, Julia.
Somebody muted me. That's exactly what I was trying to get at, Venkat, is just having a little bit more of a specific metric that shows our role in it. We just had a whole housing production workforce study commission that Steve was involved with, so I think we can look at that. And I also want to lift up, I think what Sherry was saying too, is we don't want to just be responsive to the governor's priorities, but we want to identify barriers and recommend that those be priorities to the governor as well.
Mm-hmm. What is this housing report that that you just mentioned, Julia?
The housing production workforce assessment. I'll find the link
Okay,
and put it in the chat.
That would be great. Okay. Kathy.
This may be a little digression and it may be a hold my thought for later, but another piece that kind of popped up as we were talking about which pieces to kind of hone in on, because I love this conversation about kind of barriers and how do we track against that. There's a number of other bodies of work underway with healthcare consortia that I think that this is maybe why it's a hold my thought for later, which is really around how do we monitor and pay attention to what are the other bodies of work underway and not duplicate them, but make sure that we're aware of them, reporting on them, and then if there's a gap that we're seeing, so the housing example might be the gap where it's universal to all of them, so therefore it needs us to lean in and say, this is a universal barrier. So I just wanted to put that out there. It's not specific to this, but it's kind of been resonating for me as the conversation's been proceeding.
Yeah, that's great, Kathy. And I think that confirms what a number of you have said and goes back to the homework that will have to constantly be being done, right? Does this exist? What could we leverage that's already out there? And then to Venkat's point again, and what does that mean for what we can do in early wins and long-term range? Todd.
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, I was just going to say a couple of things. First off, just raise up what Julia mentioned in the chat. It's very similar to what Sherry heard in our call with Sarah Foster. I don't think Sarah Foster's on, but she really suggested that we think about the value proposition. I think this also sort of echoes what Heather Stafford said in the previous meeting we had last Friday. On being clear on the why and the what. And then when we do this data integration and sort of finally land on these metrics, do so with sort of always asking, how is this going to make things better? What will that value add be for us to the governor? So just again, to echo what Julia already put in the chat. But then my other thought was very similar to Venkat's and Julia's when Julia said she was a little bit confused on how it was going to be helpful, for example, around increased access to affordable childcare. I was just thinking all we might need to do is add through increasing the child care workforce or something. So yeah, very similar thought to Venkat and Julia's.
That's great. That's great. And by the way, everyone, the comments in the chat are really important because being able to go back to those and track and incorporate your comments. So I really appreciate all of you putting your comments in there, knowing that we don't have time to dig in totally without that.
I just saw another thing. Speaking of the chat, I saw Seymour and Hit the Arrow, and I love what Lori Silverman said just recently around childcare. Could we also include elder care as a barrier to work? Because that ties back to the Rest Her Soul, Patsy Richards' work that was phenomenal in long-term care workers. So it leverages all that and makes a bunch of sense, at least to me. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Lori, I was going to ask if there are reports on that. If there is data and what data and where that can be found, because I think that's an incredibly important point for for individuals and families who have children and elders who both need care. That is a great point.
We all have parents, we all have elders, some of us have kids, but we all came from somewhere.
Yeah, that is a great point. Okay, so here's what we want to do. I want to move on, but I think that just to recap this imperative and objective, again, this one is about how we are really demonstrating improved collaboration and alignment, right, across the bigger system. And so that has to mean demonstrating collaboration and alignment toward shared goals of some sort. So does that resonate, first of all, and make sense that this is the place to really try on some of the bigger shared goals? And if that ends up being a housing focus as a first run, or we can spend the time to figure that out. But then the performance metric, any quick thoughts on that? How are we going to demonstrate that we have collaborated and aligned more than where we are at toward a shared goal, whatever that shared goal is? So what is offered here is that we can actually point to cases where agency policy and program guidance has been changed, adjusted toward a shared goal. And then similarly, can we demonstrate and point to alignment across program implementation at the local levels? Is that something that can be collected? Any quick thoughts on the performance metric piece here, or would you have other ideas? Sherry.
Yeah, I guess I might have another idea too, which is in some sense, our performance is the action. Our performance may not necessarily be the outcome. And I think this goes back to what Julia was kind of saying too. It's like, I do think we have to be careful about boxing ourselves into a corner about outcome-based performance, because quite frankly, we don't control any outcome. The outcome we control is our performance. So if our metrics, if we're meeting our metrics by meeting with so many agencies, we're meeting our metrics by collaboration, we're meeting our metrics by influencing the governor, by seeing that certain things have happened, right? We are meeting our metrics by surveying and getting that information out. And so part of me just wants to say that without any specific going anywhere, but that our performance metrics, increasing understanding of barriers, sure, that's great. That's something, but not just for ourselves. The state, we help the state, or we help the governor increase, the barriers, or help the work system understand the barriers. We demonstrate our programs, but again, I just want to make this distinction that our performance is in our actions. more than and our actions are actually our outcomes, if that makes sense. Because to move our outcomes further out gets outside of our purview. So anyway, I don't know if I'm making sense.
It's just a quick thought on that, Sherry. I think you're correct that our actions lead to outcomes, right? And I think those outcomes will lead to success metrics. And those metrics are indirectly our metrics too, our performance metrics too, aren't they?
Well, to a certain extent, but I go back to Julia's point, we do have to be careful because we don't control housing vouchers. We don't control, there's a ton of things that slip outside of our control once we make recommendations, and they're not really our metrics. They're not really, so our metric is our activity and our activity toward up to the point, like if you think of it as runners, up to the point where we hand off the baton, and then that runner runs that other leg. That's not our leg to run. So I do want to be careful that our metrics don't get past where our influence goes. That's all.
Agreed. But maybe the metric could be something like housing workforce gaps that we are influencing, right? And that could be a viable metric, or how the actions that we take are affecting the barriers that we identify and how those are going down over time.
See, well, I see that, but part of me thinks our metric is identifying the barriers, identifying the gaps. Like that's our metric. And then we toss that off to the governor and to others, and they will implement that. And we can have what they call, a triple bottom line. We can say that this is our top and maybe this is our secondary. So anyway, that's just my thinking. Other hands are up.
Ken and hi, so thanks for joining. But Sherry, very, very important point that I do want to reiterate is that one of a performance metric for this board, right, is have you successfully used the data, used the reports, integrated that data, turned it into a set of recommendations that are valid based on informed data that then others take and run with. And that in itself is a performance metric. So that's what you mean by it is our actions that are our metric. So did I capture that right? Okay. Yeah.
Exactly.
And then Venkat, your suggestion too and then is there something too that we can identify that is a very specific workforce housing related metric that could really demonstrate where our actions are having an impact. Did we lose Soup? Oh no, Ken, and then Soup.
Yeah. The one thing I was gonna, I'm just hearing this conversation, the one metric that seems to make sense for all parties is payroll and increased payroll across board. When you increase payroll for the state's perspective, you increase taxes and revenue coming into the state to help the state to implement programs that they want to use those dollars for. When you increase payroll, you increase it for the individual who's got take-home pay that either increases or has more discretionary dollars to spend in other areas. And when you increase payroll costs for most employers, you see revenue go up for employers because of productivity going up. So I think leaving out payroll or monitoring or metrics of payroll, you don't really see how the health of the state is doing overall and serving all customers. I think payroll gives you that one dynamic metric that crosses over to all those categories.
Yep, great point, Ken. And I think that this has been one too that has been offered as a suggestion, right? It payroll, and is that based on above living wage? Are there benefits that can be incorporated in there? Do we understand the baseline and then the increase? Because how does that then lead to impact and results that can be quantified in terms of revenue for the state or savings in benefits programs because individuals are rising, right? So and So Soup, I think that might relate to some of your ideas as well. Do you want to speak up and make some comments on what you've put in the chat and what some of these big shared workforce goals could be?
Sure. I mean, I think makes sense to think of two sets of data. I think the initial comment about, that we do need to align on certain population indicators that we want to support for Oregonians as a whole, or within, specific regions, if we're talking about local workforce boards. I think, to Sherry's point, it's right that we really can't say that we can make a big impact on everything or all of our customers. Things that are beyond, the baton that we're passing along. But those are the most important measures, right, to impact. Those where if we are collaborating and doing that collaboration, then we are making the impact we should be making. And as a state workforce development board, we need to support that alignment and use those performance measures as a guide. So I think, let's see, I just threw out a couple of ideas about what could be maybe potential population indicators. And I don't know if Sherry was here in our last conversation where I showed potential metrics for the state workforce and talent development board that are just about like, how does the board, what the performance measures are for the board. So how does the workforce and talent development board at the state level impact their customers, right? And we should choose like 3 to 5 of them. And so each group would identify their own, like, what are our customer service metrics, that if we did well in this, we are contributing to the larger goal of supporting the population indicator as a whole. I don't know if that makes sense, but included.
It does make sense. And I just want to make a plug here for Aaliyah, if you can make sure that this slide deck in full is sent out again to everyone, because your slides are included, that you shared and that you just referenced, as well as some other notes and ideas that have come in. And so I think it's going to be really important for all of you to just even skim through those again after this conversation, so that we can keep making progress and really homing in on what we want here. Okay, I'm going to ask that we go to the next page here. And I know that we only have 10 minutes, but that is also okay, because part of this work, I did reorder the imperatives to sort of have a natural kind of funnel almost. And so these ones we can come back to, and they might go a little bit quicker as well. But to your point, I think Sup and Venkat, the point that you have made repeatedly and importantly to remember, but who really are our customers, right? And so you'll see in the targets, job seeker, employer, agency partners, local workforce development boards, and community-based organizations. Now, of course, the governor, there's a whole imperative just focused, on that. But we really do want to make sure that we are connecting to your customers, right? So for this imperative, this one might feel a little bit more straightforward because it is a clear understanding of an improved use and impact of the workforce system. And so we did make some changes to the objectives. I hope I'm not shifting mindsets too fast here, but you did, right, in the past couple years, define the public and entire workforce system in Oregon. And so adding, define, and promote the coordination of the public and entire workforce system in Oregon. increasing workforce system user awareness and use by primary system customers. Again, job seekers and workers, employers, agency partners, local workforce development boards, community-based organizations, organization partners, and then create and promote a concise and compelling workforce system brand. So suggested metrics, obviously customer awareness and satisfaction, and actually including that potentially in surveys. And then we have system scope and system return on investment. And let's just spend a minute on these. For number one, the customer awareness and satisfaction, again, building in potentially some questions into existing surveys, or creating a system, again, a standardized system by which you all get a much more solid understanding of how aware and how satisfied are these multiple customers in engaging with the system. And then system scope, and Kurt, if you are still on, some of these were also ideas that Kurt Tackman sent in. How do we really get an understanding of use just from a scope and size perspective? And so annual customers served by customer group, potentially impact, is there a return on investment? Without potentially getting into the weeds, by the way, of knowing that we have very hard to serve individuals, right? And so costs go up. But is there a way to capture some overall system cost over numbers served, or compared to, again, the bigger workforce goals potentially of increased payroll, increased benefits, wages, entry into quality jobs? So these are all just ideas. Kurt, can you do you want to just spend a minute on some of those that you had offered, specifically related to this imperative? Is Kurt still on?
Yeah, I'm still on. Thank you, Lindsay.
Okay, great.
I'll try. My focus, as I've said before, I'm more on the, I guess you'd call it the public workforce system, the parts that are responsible for the authorization of WTDB, et cetera. All of the programs within the WIOA have allocations, and I mean, there's a lot of nuance as you get down lower and lower in the levels, but at a summary level, looking at how much a program receives, how many participants they serve, what the cost of serving them were, compared to a relation to overall outcomes, is a kind of a way to look at the return on investment kind of a thing. And then it would make more sense looking at like year over year trending to see how each one relates. But that's a rough idea of how I had kind of envisioned it. And again, focus mostly on those programs that we know have like fixed amounts or regular amounts of like an allocation and regular participant counts and things like that. Data that we know we have within our system, within the programs authorized by WIOA. Yeah.
Great, thanks. So again, not to brush through this one too quickly. Did I just freeze? Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Okay. But this one is potentially more straightforward, right? If you are really measuring understanding and use of the system, and if under your objectives, like you say, that means awareness and demonstrated use, right? Or take up, and do people even recognize the brand, then you can see that the metrics and the potential targets can have a pretty direct line of sight back to those, if these are the ones that make sense. Now, already there are surveys out there, right, for employers and for individuals. And so then what would this require? Maybe not such a heavy lift to have agency partners and workforce boards and community-based organizations also a chance to weigh in. And then, as Kurt points out, data that might already be out there could be repurposed and aggregated together to get to some of the numbers, the scope, and the ROI. The final imperative also, line of sight could be quite straightforward. These are suggestions. So if our imperative is to be embraced by the governor as an accountable convener, empowered facilitator, and informed advisor, and you look at your objectives of establishing consistent direct lines of communication, increasing intentionality in board, committee, and task force composition, and implementing mechanisms of accountability through research, analysis, and reports. I think that gets to Sherry's points too, right? That is your role, right? Then do these metrics make sense? Demonstrated credibility, and one of these goes back to what shared population indicator goals, right? Could the governor help call for so that the board does become a place where data can be better integrated and aggregated? Or is it the governor's office is responding to your advising or soliciting advising from the board as a performance metric, right, of your work and activity? You had increased funding in your last plan. You had it at greater 50% annually. That's still in there. What we added to diverse board membership, you had 50 max. Is there a chance to identify, agree, and fill up to 3 missing high-value appointments by end of year? If you are starting to reach into K through 12, or if one of your shared goals and bigger priorities requires individuals that are not on, is that something to think about? And then finally, for number 4, focused data-informed analysis and reports recommendations that impact policy and program guidance. Can that be demonstrated by adoption rates of recommendations by governor, legislature, and agencies? Also, your basic citation rates, right? We all write reports. Who's actually citing the board's reports and analyses? So that brings us to 1 minute. Would love quick comments, throw anything into the chat related to this, and quick verbal comments. But again, we did want to spend the great portion of our time on the first 2 imperatives. And that is what we did. We will come back to these next week. We also do want some exercise between now and next Friday, and we might reach out to some of the analysts who have volunteered, Jason, thank you, and others, to really dig into what is it that we already have, what is going to be feasible, what could we leverage, and what would be progress in 6 months compared to a year, so that we can come back to that next week. Thoughts, final comments? Ken.
Well, this one topic is one that I know when I was chair of the Workforce Board and was active with the National Governors Association, this was almost one of the driving points with all the other chairs, because these boards are really truly governor boards. The governor is supposed to sit on the board, and they usually sit through a policy advisor or a representative of the governor. And so I just see this as critical. How do you gauge it, or how you measure it, is truly by the governor. And I don't know how you drive it, but the power of this board truly kind of comes from your governor. And I've seen it in states where the governor was truly involved with the workforce board, and setting appointments and setting an objective or a mission for the board. The boards were extremely powerful in their states and transformational when it came to getting things accomplished. And so I do think this is a big priority, but I don't know how you really do that if a governor doesn't want to be engaged in the board, or one doesn't really understand the purpose of the board. And so I just want to make those comments, because it's actually been during my time on this board, it's been really critical. And I've had 3 different governors now that I've seen interact with these boards, and I've seen different approaches. But when a governor figures out the power of the workforce and how it does on polling, how it does on bringing revenue into the state, it then becomes a bigger priority. But if a governor never figures that out, this board kind of is left to float out there without really a true mission.
Great points, Ken. And I think that circles back to a lot of original comments that started driving us in this direction for this version of the strategic plan and the scorecard. And so I think an incredibly important point back to how do you earn right the ear of the governor so that you can help impact those shared priorities. Todd?
I know we're 2 minutes over. I just wanted to thank everybody for being here today and for all your good thinking and comments, but also ask a question, Lindsay. Are you planning on sending out an email post-meeting later today or Monday with any sort of homework that you want us all to do before our next engagement on next Friday?
Yes, so I will do that. And there will be just some hopefully bite-sized tasks, but that will move us along. And that will go to all of you and then also to some of you. There are some questions I also just want you to ponder a little bit more. And one of those relates to, I think, Sherry's very good points about what are our metrics, right? And so even defining for yourself what results-based accountability means and what that really looks like. And so I think going down that path a little bit more. So there will be questions that I ask all of you, and then some questions very specifically for those of you who are the real data gurus. You know where to find it, you know where it is, or you know where it isn't. And that we want to get real practical there too. Venkat, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you everyone for your participation and for a very engaging discussion today. And Lindsay, particularly, thank you for facilitating this. You have a tough job and you do it really well. So thank you and look forward to your notes and the next meeting.
Great. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for sticking it out.
Thank you. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Happy weekend.
Bye.